What's the most inappropriate thing you've witnessed at a funeral? A narcissistic family member arrived late, after everyone else was at the graveside for the burial, and probably lurking behind a tomb to pick the perfect time after the priest had just started talking, wearing an enormous hat and sunglasses and low-cut gown like she was attending the Golden Globes red carpet or something, and loudly making an absolute scene of how devastated she was, tirelings and just generally making it all about her. This hurts. The mother of the deceased putting on a terribly acted and M-fueled show about how much she loved and missed her daughter. Shortly thereafter she was convicted of the daughter's murder. Oh crap. We had a snowball fight outside the parlor of my Pop's funeral. Pop would have approved. The non-family mourners seemed horrified. I cannot stand the whole you have to be sad at funerals thing. I hope something silly like this happens at my funeral. The funeral home putting a random guy in my grandfather's casket, suit, glasses, and wedding band, while then admitting that they had misplaced my grandfather was fairly inappropriate for a funeral. A relative of my husband died. There was a gathering at her house after the funeral, hosted by her husband. It was mostly family of my husband, but there were a few friends. There was catered food and drink and people were just general socializing and telling nice stories about the deceased. About 2 hours in, a man and woman in their mid-20s show up. They are acquaintances of the widower. They walk around the house a bit, grab a drink and then disappear. I was asked to get some more drinks from the garage, which was off the kitchen. I opened the door and stepped into the garage. There was the young couple, leaning against a car and engaging in some pretty vigorous carnal relations. Another family member who was standing in the kitchen saw what I saw. I backed out of the garage because I was fairly embarrassed. I mean, who does that at a funeral? I guess the other relative told the widower because the next thing I know there is shouting from the garage and the widower is telling these two people in no uncertain terms that they needed to leave. Apparently, not only were they having sex in the garage, but they were doing lines of coke off the hood of the car. Only a few people who were at the gathering found out what happened. Thank goodness. People are freaking weird. I am however glad that the widower said something because it seems like in a lot of the stories people are not taking action and it is really infuriating. Although I do understand because obviously it's an emotional situation already. When my dad's mom passed away, there were a lot of people there. He comes from a family of 10 now as his sister passed away a while ago, so there were a lot of nieces, nephews and cousins. It was an open casket. I was around 12-13, but everyone was grabbing things from her off her from the casket. All the aunts grabbing things for their kids who don't even know her remember who she is way too young. The only thing my dad has a keepsake of his mother is a little rose pin that she wore in the home she was in before she passed. It's unfortunate and makes me feel very sad for my dad. Former mortuary industry worker. The worst is hard to call because I've seen a lot. Some honorable mentions. A rando walking on off the street and proceeding to help herself to coffee and oding in our bathroom. Didn't die. Did get narcaned. A couple fooling around in the urn casket showroom during the viewing. An angry old woman storming out of the bathroom with a fistful of tampons, screaming about how inappropriate we were for keeping them in there. Because there are children here, she threw them at the funeral director's face. They were kept in a cabinet, in a small basket, well hidden from public view. She was definitely refiling around to have found them. We were no longer allowed to keep our sanitary products in the restrooms after this. A grief-stricken mother tipping her son's casket while wailing and trying to climb inside. Less inappropriate than it was terribly sad. Caught a junkie relative digging deep into the pockets of the deceased looking for the family and is assumed money. A woman pulling down her child's pants and letting it crap in a potted plant. The funeral homeowner's horrible dog sashaying up to the front and taking a giant liquid crap in front of the casket and horrified guests in the middle of the service. The same dog biting someone at another service. Tons of brawls. Lots of drinking. Biker funerals were insane. The women were meaner than heck and fighting one another constantly. The dudes were awesome though. Super respectful. Cleaned the place up perfectly and even hauled their trash away. Most of which was bags of beer cans and liquor bottles. I loved biker funerals. I have so many, but I'll stop here. At an open casket wake, A friend of the deceased attempted to give her a drink of single malt whiskey. She ended up being forcibly removed as she wouldn't stop and spilled a lot of the alcohol in the casket. It was as horrible and inappropriate as it was heartbreaking. For everyone. Someone should have told her the morticians usually wire the deceased's jaws shut to keep the mouth from opening. My cousin's funeral. He was 27 years old and killed in a single car crash after he hit a slippery patch on the road and smashed into a concrete wall. At his funeral, all of his brothers, sisters, and parents sat on the front row at his graveside service. Then, lo and behold, my cousin's ex-girlfriend of over a year shows up and immediately inserts herself onto the front row next to his sisters, and proceeds to scream, cry, scream, wail, and throw herself on the ground periodically throughout the service. All of the family just gave her awkward stares, with no one wanted to address her inappropriate behavior. I had never seen that type of attention-demanding drama queen antics before, or since. Just wanted to throw this, and this was a funeral with military honors, Air Force, and they did the gun salute at the gravesite. I don't remember how many times they fire, but at each gunshot, she would literally shriek and collapse into the arms of either of the sisters standing next to her. I do recall at the very end, the youngest sister was sick of that crap and just let her fall on the ground, and it was raining heavily and rather muddy. Someone trying to quietly open a can while they were doing the closing prayer. There's a Bill Engvall joke in there somewhere. Maybe isn't as over the top as most of these comments, but I'm one of the Marines that has to go present the flag to the next of kin when a service member dies. It's usually old Vietnam and Korea vets, but sometimes it's a Desert Storm or recent war vet and the mother is there receiving the flag instead of a son or daughter. Point is, I've probably been to 45 funerals in the past year. It's striking how often someone's phone goes off during the service. It seems nearly every other or every third service someone's ringtones start playing. There's been a few times where someone will get up from their seat and answer the phone too. Only somewhat inappropriate, but certainly the funniest thing. It was a funeral for an uncle I was very distantly related to, and this is happening in Greece. In the summer, the church is very full and incredibly hot. You can smell the sweat. There's incense. The air isn't circulating, and the priest is just going on and on. I don't think I can describe how grim the situation was. Not totally unexpectedly therefore, just as the priest is getting to something particularly emotional, a man, an old colleague standing near the back, faints. He's completely out. Now, this guy was very tall and rather broad, so not only was it a miracle that he didn't take out the two tiny old ladies right in front of him, he was also really difficult to carry outside to get some air. Somebody has the brilliant idea that the pallbearers, those people who carry the casket, should carry him, since they've practiced it and are reasonably strong. So everybody squeezes a bit tighter. Nobody wants to leave the church. Things just got interesting. To let them through, they pick him up, 3 on one side and 3 on the other, that is, more or less as they would the casket, and start carrying him towards the door. Suddenly, this guy wakes up, turns his head several times, grasps what's going on and who's carrying him faster than anybody can respond, and immediately starts yelling, "I'm alive, I'm alive, I'm alive," at which point, one of the pallbearers laughs so hard that he drops what was thankfully a leg, and the others struggle to put him down in what is now a church absolutely exploding with laughter. The whole situation went on for a good 15 minutes in which this guy walked outside and the priest tried to resume the service, but there absolutely continued to be giggles throughout. I, being a teenager at the time, also couldn't possibly hold it back every time I thought of this guy yelling he's alive. Nobody was even particularly upset because the uncle we were burying was always laughing and joking around, so it somehow felt appropriate that we had a great laugh at his funeral. Not super inappropriate, but my grandfather was always a trickster. He had a great sense of humor. He had this little song he would sing to me, my siblings, and my little cousins where he would just repeat the words poo poo pee doo over and over. At his funeral, my aunt was telling stories about him and in the middle of her telling a story, my 6-year-old cousin screamed poo poo pee doo in front of 50 people. Needless to say, it lightened the mood a little bit and made everyone a little happier remembering him in a good way. For people asking, it's not the Betty Boop song. Picture, if you will, Two elderly women in a funeral squaring up as people are still crying from the ceremony. At the lunch after my grandpa's funeral, his daughter from a previous marriage, Dee, who no one had seen in years, showed up. Dee had been writing bad checks all the way to the state prison and had definitely had some unresolved beef with my family when she got out. The last time my mom saw her was when was 11 and Dee left her infant daughter for my mom to babysit and never came back. Fast forward to the funeral. Dee is acting like it's a family reunion, but no one is having it since she's basically screwed everyone in the room in one way or another. My grandpa's last girlfriend, a legally blind woman, tried to physically fight her until others stepped in. Gave my crazy half-aunt a pseudonym for clarity. The baby left with my mom at age 11 was not me, but that would be an amazing plot twist. Dee had said she was just having a night out and actually decided to run off to San Francisco. This was the early 70s and left her baby. When Dee didn't come back, my mom called her mom. Got a hold of a relative that took care of the baby until Dee could be reached. Sorry I don't have a lot of details after that, but the baby grew up and she actually arrived at the funeral with Dee, and I hear the apple didn't fall far from the tree. I had forgotten this part somehow. After the funeral, Dee tried to steal the car wheel to grandpa's blind boo, but my family thought ahead and a couple of my uncles waited around the house until Dee came for the car. They came outside and apparently she was scared off. Blind boo got the car in the end and wrecked it immediately. I can't make this crap up. D.U.B. At my great grandmother's funeral, her son showed up to the funeral wearing khakis and his bright orange Tennessee Vols shirt. Then he started yelling at my mom when she asked him who the pallbearers were going to be, mainly throwing a fit about who was in the will. Mind you, we hadn't even left the funeral home yet and were literally needing to know who they would be at that very moment. Needless to say, we don't talk to that side of the family anymore. My brother-in-law's girlfriend locked herself in a car, cried and screamed threatening to kill herself. At my father-in-law's funeral, she was fine 5 minutes later and explained to my in-law she did it because she's not used to not having all the attention. She thought her being pregnant would make people forget that the father died. That's disgusting. And your brother-in-law is going to be forever attached to crazy because she got pregnant. At my grandma's funeral, there was a woman that had a really bad relationship with my grandma, but one of my aunts invited her to the funeral. She started receiving people as if she was a family member and tried to put herself at the center of everything. Not a funeral, but my grandmother was on her deathbed. She was going in and out of consciousness. My butthole father and his butthole sister start arguing over who will get a wedding ring. Not for sentimental value, but because they wanted to sell it. Anyway, to make a long story short, they took the ring off and their mother came out of consciousness and the first thing she said was, "Where is my ring? Freaking scumbags." Whoa, I thought my family were bad. My aunties won't talk to each other because one of them just helped herself to grandma's 1920s gramophone, so the other confiscated the 1940s mantle clock she was supposed to have. Classy. At the wake for my very young sister, my aunt started talking to me about how she was going to write children's books and gave me a pen with her contact information on it. I'm not sure what she wanted, but I write and edit and I was working on an English degree and we barely ever see her, so I took it as self-promotion, not offering ways to reach out. My mom threw the pen away. At my grandfather's funeral, the stand-in, curmudgeonly pastor kept calling my grandfather by the wrong name. "Pastor, we are here to memorialize the life of John Smith." Crowd looks confused. "Pastor, John Smith lived a good life. I had never personally met John Smith." But, my spouse loudly, "Well, I've never met John Smith either. His name was Bob White." Everyone attending burst out laughing. Even though that's cringeworthy, I can somewhat understand that. I used to be a pastor and people would sometimes call up the church and request a pastor the day before the funeral. Sometimes we wouldn't even know the family or the person who had passed. We'd have 12 hours to prepare a funeral that was genuine for people we didn't even know. It could get tough. My grandmother's funeral was on her birthday. I purchased happy birthday balloons because it was what she would have wanted. I was immediately reprimanded by my mother when I arrived as she forgot it was her birthday. But everyone that knew the family knew that she would have loved it. Even my grandfather laughed when I walked in with them. At my cousin's funeral, one of my relatives literally tried jumping in the casket with him. Really traumatizing experience, I might add. They're just the funeral booster. Paid him $1,000 for that. At a family friend's funeral, a man I allegedly met when I was 3 came up behind me, pulled my head back by placing his hand on my neck, and told me that I might not remember him now but I will someday. That creepy old dickfoot. He was right. At my grandpa's funeral in 2006, a random drunk woman that no one in our family knew stumbled in and started singing show tunes, then crying till she was escorted out. I'm not going to laugh. I'm not going to laugh. My ex came back from her grandfather's funeral. I had to work, with family reunion pictures of herself, her siblings, and her parents, posing next to the open casket. When I casually commented that I thought it was a little off, she explained that they did so because grandma otherwise wouldn't believe he died. My mom's family are big funeral picture takers. I think it has to do with the fact that they're very rarely all in one place together, so they take advantage of that and take pictures when they can. Doesn't mean it's not creepy. My mum and sister were smoking herb at my cousin's funeral. He was only 16 when he died, so there were lots of kids there as well. My mum also wanted to surprise everyone by sending clowns to said funeral, who were going to paint butterflies on their faces because my cousin died of epidermolysis bullosa, known as butterflies disease. One of my best friends died in September. There were some questionable circumstances surrounding his death, in that we were all pretty sure it was drug related. Anyways, the guy that got him into the stuff, who shot him up the night he died, showed up to the funeral. Hi, I could have killed him. Similar thing happened to a friend of mine, odd on H. The guy who shot him up was one of his pallbearers. I was at my then boyfriend's friend's funeral. Her aunt sat with me at the back and told me that she spontaneously lubricates at funerals. Scooched away real quick. My best friend died last year from a random heart failure at 25. The pastor at the funeral went on for about 10 minutes about how we had all killed him because we were sinners and that we should join his church to make amends. He didn't know any of us. It was very uncomfortable. And a strange uncle driving past my grandmother's funeral playing Another One Bites the Dust. To everyone apologizing for laughing or whatever, please don't. It's no longer a sore point for me or my family. That uncle was suffering from a mental breakdown due to drug abuse and a high pressure job, and that combination eventually took its toll. It makes it easier to deal with them if he was just being a spiteful prick, as we thought at the time. I know it's disrespectful, but that's absolutely hilarious. A marriage proposal to the recently widowed. She accepted. I know this is a thing in some families where if a guy dies, a single, male, relative of the deceased will end up marrying the widow. Why this is a thing, I don't know, but no it is. So, the divorced brother proposed to his deceased brother's wife and she said yes. I doubt there was any cheating going on there. The two are still happily married as well. I guess it's not totally inappropriate given who had died, but a group of guys lit up a fat joint at a funeral I went to in HS. I guess it was his smoking buddies, but it didn't go over that well. My step-grandmother died a few months before the Borat movie came out, so everyone was in full-blown Borat mode. Someone's phone went off and their ringtone was "Throw the Jew down the well." She, as well as most of the people attending the funeral, were all Jewish. Did your step-grandfather walk up to the casket and say "my wife"? The priest repeatedly referred to my grandmother by the wrong name. After the 4th or 5th time my aunt got up and quietly told him the correct name. My grandmother had attended church weekly for decades. There was no reason for the priest to not know his parishioner. Needless to say, we did not pay his fee. My own kids, boys ages 10 and 8, at their great-grandfather's wake, they got a chair and moved it to the casket and started making his mouth into smiley face, laughing the whole time. When me and their grandfather, my father-in-law, saw it, I immediately pulled them away and told them they shouldn't do that. Grandpa laughed and said it's fine. He would have really loved that they did that. We later found out that the great-grandfather had asked the funeral home ahead of time to put a sign in his hand that said "Thanks for coming," but they refused. I want a get well soon balloon in mine. Not sure if this counts as inappropriate, but when my high school classmate died, we were already in college if I recall correctly. His ex, also high school classmate, came to the funeral. She cried so dramatically because she wasn't able to end things with our dead HS classmate on a good note that guests thought she was the current SOGF that time. Current SOGF was left alone, sitting alone, staring blankly at the casket while relatives, friends, HS classmates comfort the ex. Also, it got to the point that the boyfriend, can't recall if he attended or just got word of what happened of that girl during that time, got jealous and got angry because it looked like she cared more for the dead than him. Posted a rant on social media. TLDR. During my college years, high school classmate died. His ex came to the funeral and cried dramatically, looking like she's the GF, and current GF was ignored during her sobbing. BF of the ex that time was furious. My sister did something like this. She had her current boyfriend drive her to her ex's funeral and wait outside as she cried and placed a picture of them together in the casket. His mom came up and gave her the picture back. I am so happy I wasn't there. My boyfriend's ex-wife being all happy and smiley cause he didn't update his will before he died and she was still getting half. My grandmother died when I was about 10 and my older sister was 12. We were at the wake for nearly 6 hours and the makeup they had put on her was very bad. It was sad and disturbing. To lighten the mood, an uncle told my sister and I that you couldn't feel it if someone tried to lick your elbow. We went around licking elbows of grieving family members for the rest of the wake. Yes, you can feel if someone licks your elbow. I'm sorry, but imagining that had me laughing so hard I started crying. I went to my uncle's funeral with my dad, sister and friends. My father was already hammered and my idiot friends dressed in t-shirts and shorts. To top it off, my cousin wore the skimpiest top to her own dad's funeral. My father, wasted, was hitting on his own sister-in-law. My cousin ended up inviting us to smoke medical marijuana in her car. It was a disaster. Intervention. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.